and at Kent State University in Ohio was an influential factor leading to the end of the Vietnam War due to its effects on college students across the nation, the government, and the way that the media portrayed the situation. May 4th, 1970. On this date at Kent State University in Ohio, the National Guard shot into a crowd of protesters, killing 4, wounding 9, and scarring a generation. It was the middle of the Vietnam War. There was no end in sight, and protests on college campuses were common.
By 1970, 50,000 troops were dead, with hundreds of thousands more wounded, and with the draft in place, dissent was growing.
On April 30th, 1970, President Richard Nixon announced to the country that the U.S. would be invading Cambodia.
The time has come for action.
So we were immediately very upset by this and very angry. We were shouting at the television, we were cursing Nixon, and we knew that we were going to be taking some serious actions to stop that war and to stop the invasion of Cambodia.
The next day, protesters met on campus.
One of the speakers took a copy of the U.S. Constitution and said, Nixon's killed it, why don't we give it a fair burial?
That night in downtown Kent, about 500 students from Kent State started a protest in the street. The police came and tried to stop the protest. By Saturday morning, 14 people had been arrested and the damage was assessed at $5,000. A dawn-to-dusk curfew was put on the city. The Kent mayor called the National Guard and brought them to the Kent State campus.
That night, 300 people met on campus to begin a protest. Over time, the group grew to 2,000 people, and they marched to the ROTC building on campus.
ROTC, or the Reserve Officers Training Corps, is a program at many colleges that train you for military service in addition to college classes.
Due to burning rags thrown by the students, the ROTC building caught fire. After a long struggle, the firefighters put the fire out with the help of the National Guard.
The next day, May 3rd, had little controversy. Then it was Monday, May 4th. At 11 a.m., 200 people gathered on campus, and within an hour, the group had grown to 1,500 people.
And so it began.
We began to fire tear gas canisters aimed towards the crowd, but the wind was blowing at such a level that it blew the tear gas across the commons and tear gassed other people who were just watching.
The students refused to leave as the National Guard requested, and as a result of the tense situation, the National Guard fired into the crowd, killing 4 and wounding 9.
The 4 victims were Alison Krauss, who was protesting,
Jeffrey Miller, also protesting,
William Schroeder, who was watching,
and Sandra Shore, who was walking by.
Of the 9 wounded students, one of them, Dean Kaler, was permanently injured. According to the New York Times, the students were victims of panic, ineptness, or worse on the part of the National Guard.
The shooting lasted 13 seconds, during which 67 shots were fired.
Hundreds of people were falling on the ground. And I believe that many of them were being hit.
I started screaming, "They're shooting their guns, they're shooting their guns."
And I believe someone said that they heard me say, "Oh my God, they shot me."
The National Guard told the protesters that they had 15 minutes to clear the area. Professor Glenn Frank tried to disperse the crowd.
I don't care whether you've never listened to anyone before in your lives. I am begging you right now. If you don't disperse right now, they're going to move in, and it can only be a slaughter. Would you please listen to me? Jesus Christ, I don't want to be a part of this.
Finally, the crowd realized the situation and decided to leave.
There was a very mixed reaction to the shootings. Some sided with the government, while others sided with the protesters.
I'm sorry they didn't kill more.
Really?
Really, sir.
More of the students?
Yes, because they were warned and they knew what was happening and they should have moved on.
Most people, however, blamed the National Guard. and the public anti-war level was increased.
Kent State received many letters about the shootings. One was from a 9-year-old boy from California who said that the tragedy really affected me. Now, killing was happening right here to students bigger than me on what appeared to be a giant playground.
One thing that turned people against the government was the media.
For example, this picture, which became an icon of the tragedy, showed to the public the true horror that was experienced by the protesters. The media called it many things. They called the National Guard leaderless and said that they had a flimsy excuse for opening fire on the students. The commanding general said the troops had run out of tear gas. Worst of all, they called it a massacre. And on a national conference, Richard Nixon looked visibly nervous, according to the New York Times.
As Business Week magazine said, this is a dangerous situation. It threatens the whole economic and social structure of the nation.
All of these things led to college students and the rest of the public turning against the government and the war.
After the people were shot at Kent State, it became much more serious, and everybody I think people became more afraid. I think people who were moderate before then, or who were inclined to trust the government, became less inclined to trust the government, less inclined to trust what they were saying. In general, the country got fed up with Vietnam.
It's horrible that the only way you can get people to listen is to have 4 kids killed. There was no big blow-up over Cambodia until 4 kids were killed. You could have all the peace marches, but nobody would do anything.
The shootings caused a giant increase in anti-war protests, which caused many universities and colleges around the nation to be shut down.
As soon as the shootings happened and the news was all over the place, they gave us 24 hours to get out of the dormitories and go home, and we didn't even have exams that semester.
Some of the colleges that were shut down were Notre Dame, Penn State, and Syracuse.
In some universities, chaos struck. For example, 5,000 students from Syracuse marched downtown and protested, leaving 71 windows smashed. A dozen people were wounded by a birdshot at the University of Buffalo.
On May 9th, over 150,000 protesters converged in Washington, D.C. The protest lasted all day, while in Vietnam, many soldiers protested by refusing to fight. The numerous protests greatly affected the government's plans for the war in the rest of the country. The Cambodian invasion was significantly decreased. The war itself was also de-escalated. In 1971, the 26th Amendment was passed, changing the voting age to 18 from 21.
College-age students were able to cause this change by saying, if we're old enough for a president to send us to war, then we're old enough to vote that president out of office. There was great debate in the government concerning Vietnam.
This was partly due to many outspoken state representatives and other high-level government figures. The Kent State shootings was an important part of our history and is not to be forgotten.
This could be your university. The students and National Guardsmen could be you, or young people of your neighborhood. Or, if you are old enough, your sons and daughters. The city of Kent could be your community. That is why you need to know what happened to you, so that you can prevent it from happening again.
Just as in the case of the Boston Massacre, few were killed, but it inspired a revolution. Prior to the Kent State shootings, the continuation of the Vietnam War seemed inevitable to the general public. The shootings, however, brought anti-war protests to the mainstream media and showed the country how out of control things were here at home and highlighted the ineptitude of the government.
At every march you had police, and they were armed, but you never thought the police were actually going to shoot you.
On our own. This summer I hear the drumming, forget in Ohio.